up, everyone? I'm Ruthina Porterfield, and this is Liberated Conversations with Ruthina. So I'm going to be kicking it off a little different for this particular episode. It's Black History Month, and we're celebrating legacy. So I'm actually going to kick it off by showing you a picture of someone of which I share a legacy with. What you're going to see here is a picture of Ruth Smalls. Yes, you heard that right. Ruth Smalls. I am named after her. She is my grandmother, and she was from Alabama. She was a nurse, a wife, a mother, and an evangelist. And yesterday, at the time of this recording, which was Valentine's Day, we honored the 32nd anniversary of when we laid her to rest. Yes, I lost her when I was very young. And as I've gotten older, I have come to mourn all of the things that I don't know about her, all of the wisdom that I could have gleaned from her. And it's elders, because what we do with that knowledge that we learn from them, that experience, it is how we honor them. It is how we celebrate them. In this episode, I'm going to be talking with Jennifer Lynn. She is the host of the Telling Her Story podcast, where she honors her grandmother. We're going to talk about celebrating those that are older than us, that are still here with us. We're going to talk about gleaning wisdom from their experience. This is one I have been looking forward to so much, and I want you to share and watch and listen and learn and join the conversation. Hello, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm really, really excited. I'm one that kind of jumps right in. So first, I want to kind of establish how I found you. I basically was kind of podcast searching and kind of doing some stuff with my own grandmother, just looking at stuff. And your podcast came up because your grandmother, Rosa T. Beard, it just kind of popped up in the Google search, right? And I said, telling whose story? Who is this person? And so I was just immediately interested. And as soon as I saw that it was your grandmother and you wanted to tell her story, I was immediately drawn to it. So how in the world did you come to do this podcast? How did it come about where you wanted to honor her in this way?
No, that's a great question. So the Telling Her Story podcast is a monthly podcast where I explore the life and legacy of my grandmother, Rosa T. Beard. And how it came about is really similar to your story. Now that I'm an adult, she passed away in 2010 at the age of 91, so very long, blessed life. But now that I'm an adult, I started to think and explore so many things I wanted to have conversations with her about. And just being able to talk to her about her wisdom and all of that. And I've always been fascinated by her story. She has a very remarkable story. And I've always told people, somebody should write a book about her. There should be a movie or something like that. I was always putting it in somebody else's kind of court. And in August of 2020, I felt like God really convicted me and said, you're waiting for somebody else to do it. Why can't you? And so at that point, I instantly started thinking of all the excuses of why I couldn't do it. Oh, I'm too busy. Of course. I have so much going on. I can't do it. But then the Holy Spirit was like, you can talk to people and you can find an hour of, or so of your time to have a conversation. And so that's really where it came about, the idea of doing a podcast. And so at that time, I knew nothing about a podcast. So for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I poured myself into researching and all of that. And on September 4th, I launched the first episode of the podcast. So it happened very quickly.
Wow. You were not playing.
I tend to get tunnel vision when I decide to do something. So
No, I feel you. I am the same way. I am the same way. Now, you had your grandmother actually lived to 71. And
correct.
so but she passed and I was very young, very young. And so I wasn't even old enough to understand what to learn about her. And so for me, as again, like I said in the intro, as I got older, it was like, man, you start going through things and you wonder if your mother and your grandmother went through these same things and what their experience was. So I'm wondering, as you began to speak with all of these different people about your grandmother, what did you learn about her as a woman as it applies to you?
Wow. So this journey has been so interesting because I've learned so much about myself from
I'm
hearing
sure.
stories about her. And it's
Yeah.
amazing because we don't know how deep their influence goes in our lives,
Oh my
um,
gosh. Oh
even
my
if we
gosh.
aren't able to interact with them. And so, like, just things about her love of education, her love of
Mm.
mentorship, her love of science.
Yeah.
Um, Her quiet confidence, her perseverance, like all of these things, I see myself in that. And it's
Wow.
been a very remarkable experience because I started on this journey to learn more about her. And I feel like I'm learning about myself in the process,
Right.
which has been such a phenomenal, kind of um, discovery out of the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing about I actually also lost my mother but it'll be 11 years this year.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry.
one of the things that I learned after she passed was understanding that she was a woman before she was my mother, right?
Hmm.
And understanding that it was that my mother or my mama, it was this woman. And this woman was bringing all of her experiences, all of her circumstances and situations and mental capacities and or lack thereof to this whole new job of being a mother. And
Hmm.
so when you talk about your grandmother and the different time that they lived in, you know what I mean? The
Absolutely.
the the different circumstances that they were growing up in. That's what they brought to being a mother and to being a grandmother. And when
Hmm.
you talk about what's inside you, that's what's inside you, right?
Exactly. And like that's the thing that I don't want people to miss through this podcast. Because my grandmother was remarkable no matter what year she would have been born. But she
I
was
love
born
it.
but she was born in 1919. And the things that she was able to accomplish, and the things that she was able to do during that time period, to me is absolutely phenomenal. So, like, I'm at the age now where I'm trying to figure out how do I balance a career and a family and all of these
Mm,
things, that they did, like you said, as women, because they were women first before they were, all of these other things. And then I look at her and she was a career woman. She got married in 1948. 2 days after she got married, after her wedding, she was on a train to New York to go get her master's from Columbia University.
wow.
And I'm like, how many people are focused
Ooh,
enough to 2 days after you've gotten married to go continue your education in 1948 when most people didn't go to school, let alone go get a master's
right.
um, degree. And so, just those things. And so I wish I could have that conversation with her of how did you balance it all? And she did all of these things. She had her career. She poured into the lives of so many people. She was active in her community, but then she was also very present in terms of her family. Like I
Mm,
didn't realize she did all of this, because to me she was just my grandmother growing up.
right.
And so, how do you do that? How do you maintain your career and do all of these things, but then at the same time make sure that you're pouring into your family and you're raising and leaving a legacy that will touch future generations. And I think she did it, she made it look effortless. And I know it wasn't, but she certainly made it seem that way.
I know those generation of women were like Wonder Woman, right? They were like
Exactly.
they were like Wonder Woman and Superwoman that that I don't think we can begin to fathom, because you have to remember that they did all of this stuff without the age of technology and all of the things
Mm-hmm.
that we have access to today, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so it makes what they did even more phenomenal, even more amazing. And it almost challenges us, right? I feel like it almost challenges us to do better, to be better. Not in a sense that we should feel bad for what we haven't done necessarily, but just in a way, again, to kind of honor them by saying, in those moments where you feel like you can't,
Exactly.
looking at what they did and going, wait a minute, hold up. This chick did this with barely half or a quarter of what I have at my disposal. Yeah, I think I can kind of push through. You know what
Exactly.
I'm saying? So I appreciate that so much. Another reason why I was attracted to the podcast was hearing the other lives that your grandmother touched, and I'm very happy to see and hear that you were able to kind of have access to them and talk to those who have who were so influenced by her. What do you see? And I want to pose this question in a way, and please ask me a question if you don't understand it. What is it that you now see through their eyes that you couldn't see through yours?
Mm, that's a great question. I see through their eyes the power of one person. The power that we have to influence other people just by believing in them.
Yeah.
And I think that is beautiful. Right now I'm mostly talking to the guys who are part of her Rocket Club. So in
Yeah, tell us about
1950,
that.
I think it was like 1958, they started, a group of young men started a rocket club, and they were interested in aeronautics and space exploration. This was during the big space race age.
Right.
And she served as their advisor, and she was pouring into them, and she gave them license to explore and really encourage STEM before STEM was even a thing.
Wow.
And these young men, who came from underprivileged backgrounds in the segregated South, who didn't have all of the opportunities that many people would have, the power of one person believing in them. And, they went on to do phenomenal things. You have, somebody who became a US ambassador. One of them became a US ambassador. One went on to be a senior Army intelligence official. Another is a physician and was a chairman for the Medical College of Georgia for several years.
Good night.
You have all of these different young men who were influenced by one person. And so I think seeing through their eyes that I couldn't see for myself in her was just how much of an influence she had on other people. I know the role she played in my life as a grandmother.
Right.
And that aspect of her, but then to be able to see how her influenced others, I think has been a beautiful experience, just from listening to their stories and hearing that all of these years later. I mean, these are guys who were in her class in like 1958, 1960, 65, and they still talk about her as if it was yesterday. And so, to have that kind of lasting influence as well, I think there's something very beautiful in that.
Yeah. There's when you speak with people who knew the woman versus the grandmother, right? It's almost like being introduced to a whole different person. It's like being introduced to someone totally new that is amazingly interesting, and you want to get to know more, which I'm sure has led to more episodes of the
Exactly.
podcast, right? So did you know about this club? How much did you know about this Rocket Club before you started the podcast?
Exactly. I knew a little bit about it. I had heard about it. I knew she had been, a chemistry teacher for decades. And I work in the sciences. I'm in the sciences. And so, it would kind of come up here and there. Oh, look, you're in the sciences, like, grandmommy was. And she had these men, young men that she took to the science fair because kind of the big thing that came out of this Rocket Club was in 1966 when segregation ended and they were allowed to compete into some of the, local fairs in Augusta. They ended up winning first place. And then they went on to the International Science Fair and won first place by the U.S. Patent Office for the best project in biology. And so I had known a little bit about that, but not all of the details and all of the granular things that I learned through the podcast. And so, again, there are things that you kind of hear about, and as a young person, you're like, oh yeah, well, grandmommy does that, and she did that, but you don't really pay attention to it. And I feel almost guilty now that I'm learning about all these things, and I feel like I almost took it for granted. Like there's so many questions I wish I could have asked when I had the opportunity to. But I'm very grateful for this opportunity through the podcast to continue to learn. And I think that's what true legacy is, to be able to still have a lasting effect that goes on way after you're gone. Is what lasting and true legacy is. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to learn more about these things that I kind of just heard in passing, when I was growing up.
Right. I speaking of one of the episodes, or I'd say a mini episode that I appreciated the most was when you played her voice, and when you she was talking about her own experience from her words, from her voice. There is a power, particularly after someone is gone, when you a little time has passed, when you hear their voice. There's something that happens within you. There's an internal reaction. There's an internal spiritual reaction when you hear their voice or you see them, right? And it was very odd because I almost felt, just hearing her voice, it was very weird because, there had been several episodes before this. And at that point, it just seems there's this person that you're just talking about. But once you add a voice or a face to this name and this figure that you've been talking about, all of a sudden the reality of their existence becomes huge, right? Mm-hmm. When did you come across that recording? How did that recording of that episode, and which episode, just for our listeners so they can go back to it if they need to, when did you come across that recording? What episode that was?
Great. So that episode is a special bonus episode on the podcast. You can find it on the channel, and it's called In Her Own Words. Okay. And I came across this, oddly enough, it was almost a day or two after I announced that I was going to launch this podcast. My mother found the tape. So, and so we knew we had it, but, it was just kind of one of those things we did. We tucked it away. And so my mom found it like a day or two after in kind of like our things. And so I'm like, that's not a coincidence at all. Like my grandmother in true form, she's like, this is great what you're doing, but I have some stuff to say too. And so that's how I view it. But we actually ended up recording that. It was back in 2008. It was on Christmas Day. We were all sitting around after opening gifts and things, and we decided to talk and record her and allow her to talk about her life. And so, the video was much longer. It's actually a video of us, and the recording is about an hour or two long. But, I just wanted to share that snippet of her talking about her story and telling her story, because she can do it so much better, than any of us can. But, just the fact that we found that, after I announced it, was almost to me like her putting her blessing on the podcast and what we're trying to do. So
I love it. And you know what? That goes to everyone who's listening. That goes to people really grasping the importance of memorializing those moments, right? When you think that it's just a picture here or a video recording there or a snapshot here or whatever, those things will come back to really touch you in a way that you definitely don't know until that moment happens, right? What was that like, hearing that voice for that first time when you?
Um, it was emotional, but it was beautiful too, in that it's almost like she never left. Like when you hear her
Mm,
voice, it's like she's still here. And I think because she was a petite woman. She was a relatively petite, very small woman, but she had such a big presence.
yeah,
And so she was such a big force, I think, in all of our lives,
yeah.
that it was as almost as if it could have been yesterday. And so it was comforting, to be able to see her and hear her again, and recall those memories and recall those times together. And I'm incredibly blessed in that both of my grandmothers, my maternal and paternal grandmothers, lived very long, blessed lives.
Yeah.
My maternal grandmother, who the podcast is about, she lived to be age 91. My
Mhm.
paternal grandmother, she lived to be 93. And
Wow.
so, just the lasting influence that they had in my life in both sides,
Mm.
has been phenomenal.
Wow. She lived to be 91. You were an
Mhm,
adult when she
mhm.
passed? You were a full-grown
Yes.
adult. Okay. So you experienced grandmama as a child and grandmama as an adult. What was the difference?
As a child, she was just grandmommy. She
Of
she was
course.
the one who taught me how to bake.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
that was something we would do together when she would come to visit us in Atlanta. We would always bake cakes and pies and things together. So I credit her for my love of baking. She was a phenomenal cook in general. Um,
Okay.
we would go visit her and my other grandmother in the summers, in Augusta, Georgia. And so she was just there. She never missed an important event, like if there was a recital or anything that I had going on, even for me. And, talking about coming full circle, when I was I believe it was in the eighth grade, I won first place in a science fair here in
Okay.
Atlanta.
Okay.
And it went on to the state and all of that. And she actually drove from Augusta to come to go with me to the science fair. Now, in hindsight, now, like when I'm hearing about the Rocket Club and the science fairs that they were a part of, I understand now why that was so important to her. But, at that time, it was just, her being supportive, to me, and for me. But, she just, with all that she had going on, and she did a lot, she was always present. And I love that. I would say as an adult, just, especially in kind of like the last few years of her life, being able to talk to her more. Like I remember we were having a conversation once, um, and she was mentioning that, some people didn't necessarily, um, initially approve of her marrying my grandfather. I was asking her, I was like, was that hard for you? Or were you worried about kind of going against them? She was like, no. She said they weren't marrying him. I was.
Okay.
And so, like, having those types of conversations with her, like, she was so independent and had her own mind, like, even in the 40s, like,
Right.
now in 2021, like, I would still, depending on who it is, would take that into account. But she was like, no, that was my decision. Like, she asked them, she took their opinion into consideration, but at the end of the day, it was her decision.
It was her
And so
decision.
I appreciate, as an adult, being able to have those honest and transparent conversations with her. I wish I could have had
Yes.
more, but
Yes.
it definitely was a different type of relationship as I aged.
Yeah, I think as you get older, and it's one of the things why I said in the intro about mourning those things that I didn't get to learn or those questions that I didn't get to ask, is understanding them, as I also said before, them as a woman, right? You discover, of course, what they did. I know different things that she did, but I've always been intrigued by their emotions as a woman, as women, as men, of course, for our male ancestors too, but that connection, that female connection, especially as us being created with these emotions and these feelings, you don't look at the emotions and feelings of your elders um, on a regular basis. You don't consider that in who they are, and that's a part of who they are. So when you talk about your grandmother getting married, this chick fell in love. She fell in love, and she experienced the passion and the romance and all of those things. And clearly there was some kind of great love story there, because she said, I don't care what you people say. I'm marrying this man. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with him. How
Mhm.
about that? You know?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so the importance of learning that and understanding those emotions and those feelings, it goes towards humanizing them outside of just that title of
Absolutely.
grandmother, you know?
And I would encourage you, continue, even though your grandmother isn't here for you to talk to, for those who may still be around, talk to them, have those conversations, still document it, because, just as I'm learning from, those who she, touched, those other lives, your grandmother's legacy lives on through those
Yeah.
other people as well. And so, document that for future generations. I've always my mom's big into genealogy. And so when I finished school and kind of moved back to Atlanta, I got into it as well. And
Okay.
so that's always been a passion of mine to understand those stories
Mhm.
of those who came before us. And so, even though she's not here, like, I don't want you to feel like it's completely a missed opportunity. You can't get it directly from her,
Right.
but you can still learn so much about her from those who she touched.
Yeah, and that's something that I am, and I appreciate that. I actually, it's something that I'm learning, because I've always been someone that has a very vivid memory. So the memories that I do have, I was born and raised in South Carolina, in Charleston,
Okay.
um, but my grandmother was born and raised in Alabama, and so initially I thought that would be a hard journey to take to learn, and then I started going back through my memories. I'm like, hold up, we spent summers going to her family reunions, so there's a starting place. And I
Mhm.
pray that as I'm speaking, that hopefully people, you find a starting place, right? You go back to those memories that you have, and those are little nuggets that you can pull from and kind of let that lead you on that journey of learning more about this person who was a
Absolutely.
person, right?
Hmm.
And so that's what I kind of use to kind of start the journey. Old family reunion t-shirts from 30 years ago that have names that I don't recognize, but I'm
Hmm.
able to, hey, go research and find out about and realize, okay, that's how she's hooked up. Okay, so where does this puzzle, how does this puzzle fit together? Right? Because it's a part of who you
Absolutely.
are,
Exactly. It
you
is.
know? It's
So much of
ingrained.
who we are exactly is from them, and so we owe it to them to understand and learn that part of us.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think that it begins to answer some questions that you may have about yourself. I know as I got older, I always had I had a question of, hold up, where do I fit into this immediate family? Because I feel different. I feel a little different. And there's so many people that go through that, right? Where they're like, okay, this feels off. Why do I feel like I'm different from people around me? And I think as you begin to learn about those that came before you, you will find that you actually aren't different. There's just something in you that little piece of DNA or whatever that's that's kind of sparking and growing more in you for some reason than it may not have in someone else, you know? And
Exactly.
and
Hmm.
so that's the important. This is, I guess, towards the end as I begin to ask you these final questions, what is it that you learned about you that was different than what you expected as you learned about her? Like, what is it about her that you discovered that was in you that you didn't realize came from her? Or was there anything? Maybe there wasn't anything.
Um, I would say just it's not something that I necessarily try to do, but I've been told um, that I am very encouraging, that I can be very encouraging for people. And I just thought it was, kind of part of my nature and all of that. And so in talking to all of these different students that she mentored, and hearing about how influential she was in their lives, and how important kind of her um, praise and opinion and wisdom was to them, I realized that maybe some of those things that I've been told, are characteristics that I have may have come from her. And so I think that was something that I wasn't completely aware of um, about her, or that those things that they're saying about her as I'm listening, I'm like, people have told me that about, me. And I never really paid much attention to it. And so I would say that's probably been the biggest thing.
Yeah. I and I'm sure you're going to continue to learn more as you begin to speak to even more people and discover all these other things about her. Have you found any other pictures as this process on this journey, on this podcasting journey? Have you found more pictures and other things that you had not seen before?
So not really. I've always been kind of like the family historian. I love
Oh,
pictures.
okay.
I love pictures, and I have catalog pictures. So I actually have hundreds of pictures
Oh,
of my
wow.
family, like, stored away in different places. And so I'm actually kind of excited about the podcast because it's giving me an opportunity to share some of those photos now. And so
Yeah.
things that before that I just had for me that I'm now able to use. And so, yes, we have kind of the auditory, the interview portion of the podcast, which is, on the different podcast platforms, but then also on the Instagram page, I try and show through different posts pictures that tie back to the different episodes that we have. And so that's been so fun for me, just to be able to also document almost in a visual way her
Yeah.
story that goes along with, the stories that we're hearing through the podcast.
Are you considering by chance either doing a blog or a book about her?
Right now, I'm not. I believe
Okay.
some of my family members may be interested in doing a book, and I hope they will. you know, if the podcast can serve as like a foundation of the interviews to
Yeah.
kind of go into that book, but who
Yeah.
knows?
Okay.
I'm just trying to be obedient to where I feel like I'm being led.
Right.
And so I definitely felt like I was being led to do the podcast and go
For
ahead and get
sure.
this started. And so, we'll see what kind of God has planned for next steps. But it's been an amazing experience, and I've loved every moment of the journey so far.
I'm excited for your journey. And I'm praying that it inspires others to take, as it did for me, to inspire others to take their own personal journey to discover more about those people in their lives that they love and didn't know. It's so important. See, to me, that's Black history. We learn
Absolutely.
about we learn about all these other historical figures, and that's great. It's important. But I think it's even more important to learn about those people that went into making you who you are. It's super
Absolutely.
important. So tell everyone where they can hear the podcast. Where is it available?
Okay, so if you go to Instagram or Facebook at Telling Her Story Podcast, it's also available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any of the major podcast platforms. You can just search Telling Her Story Podcast, and you should be able to find it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed this. And like I said before, I'm praying that it touches others and encourages others and influences others to learn more about other people and their families so they can learn more about who they are. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Hang out for a second. So, you guys, thank you so much for listening. Take what you've heard and apply it. Go research, find out about people in your family, find out about those loved ones, and talk to those who you have here now. Take that opportunity while you have it to hear their stories. Ask those questions because I'm telling you, more than likely, they're willing to answer them. So until our next conversation, don't forget to check out my website at RuthinaPorterfield.com and follow me on Instagram at RA Porterfield. In the meantime, peace, stay cool, and God bless.